Hello guys and girls, Itai here. I'm an airline captain. I fly an Embraer 175 for a US based air carrier full-time, and by far the most questions I got recently with the spread of new add-ons that deal with the E-Jets by Embraer is what is the TRS page, the takeoff dataset page, how do we deal with them, etc. So I want to do a little video today and explain a little bit the basics of it. I'll try not to go in too deep, but I want you to at least have an understanding of the basic terms and features of the system. So first things first, the two engines that we have, they have a FADEC. FADEC is a full authority digital electronic control system. Basically, it's a computer that controls each engine. It's there to, first of all, protect the engine. It's there to control the maximum N1. N1 is the fan up front, right? So it's measured by percent of N1. So it controls what is the maximum N1 for the current phase of flight, and also what thrust to actually put out based on what we requested based on the TLA, the thrust lever angle, or what the computer, the auto throttle system, for example, wants. And another feature it has is to control the ATTCS. So I'm going to go over the ATTCS in just a second, but the FADEC is basically the engine computer, and basically every request that we're doing through the MCDU, the computer, we're sending it to the engines through the FADEC. Another term, ATTCS, ATTCS ATTCS, the Automatic Takeoff Thrust Control System. This is a system that basically designed to have additional thrust available for us in case we need it in the most critical phases of takeoff and go around. So basically, if that as soon as the ATTCS system is armed, we can disarm it, but if it is armed, then it is waiting to have some kind of an emergency event, and if that system is triggered, it's going to give us the absolute max power that the engine can produce. We're going to see those thrust ratings in just a second. If it's armed, if it's white; if it's engaged, it is green. And basically, it is looking for any difference between N1s. As soon as it engages, it's looking for big differences between the engine thrust outputs, as in an engine failure, an actual engine failure, as indicated, an engine failure on takeoff and on go around, and a wind shear detection. Also in a wind shear, the ATTCS system will engage, and once it engages, it does give us the maximum output that the engine can produce. And you might say, hey, Itai, but you know, that's all great, but we know a little bit about takeoff performance, and we know that our V1 is based on the decision speed, etc., and the rotate speed. They're all dependent on the VMCA and VMCG, the minimum control speed of the airplane in case an engine failure. Telling us you have one engine failure, you're asymmetric thrust, so the remaining engine you're going to increase even further. And the answer is yes. When we calculate in my company, it is mandatory to use the ATTCS for every takeoff and go around, for that matter. It's just we keep it armed for all these critical phases. The takeoff calculation is based upon the ATTCS being on, and therefore it's already have made all the corrections for VMCG, VMCA, etc. So that is for the ATTCS. We talked about FADEC, and now let's go quickly over what thrust ratings do we have available for us. So ignore that top part, the reserve part. Basically, these are I arranged them. These are the ratings that we have. I pre-arranged them for you in the order of what is the most output. So I'm starting from the space over there. From go around is the absolute highest rating we can produce, along with takeoff one. It's pretty much the same thrust output. After that, we have continuous. So takeoff, the takeoff and the go around phases, and as well as of course the emergency, the reserve ratings that I'm going to talk about in a bit are limited by time. So if we want the absolute maximum thrust we can produce with no time limit, that's max continuous. After that, we have climb 1. If we are using takeoff 2, it's there, and there's climb 2, and of course cruise is the lowest before landing. The system switches to go around. If the ATTCS is engaged, it will go to the reserve thrust setting that corresponds to whatever we want. So if we took off using takeoff 1, for example, and there's an ATTCS event, the ATTCS will engage the engines that are operating to takeoff 1 reserve. If we're in a go-around mode and there's an ATTCS event, the ATTCS would switch the FADEC from go-around mode to go-around reserve limit. And another way we can do that is if we push the thrust lever, the throttle, so to speak. So the thrust lever, if we push them from the toga detent further to the max detent, and that's how we can also manually get reserve power. It's not. I should say this is not something we do in normal procedures. It's an emergency event. It's a response to a wind shear or an engine failure during takeoff or go around, or loss of thrusts. That we don't necessarily think that the engine has failed yet, but it's a loss of thrust. So I'm gonna leave the engine rating systems right there, and then I want to keep going with this. So we can see that whatever we have the MCDU, and then we also have the ICAS that I pulled out over there. That's the main, the central display that's right over the middle. I just pulled it out because on the top over there you can see 90.1. That's the current N1 limit. Takeoff 1, you can see in cyan. That's the actual limit that we're using at the moment, and we can see the word ATTCS, the ATTCS. That means that the ATTCS system is armed. It is white, therefore it's armed. So we want to have armed it before departure. So let's look at the thrust rating select. Right now we're on the ground, so we can't switch manually to continuous yet, or to cruise, etc. What we can do is we can control the takeoff data set, which basically controls what is the takeoff N1 limit going to be for this departure, and we can toggle between climb 1 and climb 2, climb 1 being higher, and climb 2 being obviously lower. Just a quick word on climb 1 and 2. The difference is obviously climb 2 is lower. We as pilots want to use climb 1. It saves on fuel, because the quicker we get to the economical cruise level and speed, the more economical we are flying. So we want to use the higher limit. Also, it gives us better performance to climb over problematic terrain, possibly even clouds that are going to give us some turbulence. Climb 1 would be better for us as pilots. The company often wants us to use climb 2 as a default, because it saves on engine maintenance. And basically, if we're using climb 2, the more we use climb 2, we're delaying further the need to do maintenance events on the engine. So as a default, we're using climb 2, and if we need to, we're switching to climb 1. TLA trim, basically, it's a system that basically equalizes between the engines automatically. We don't need to do anything. Just the FADECs basically are matching one another from there. And from this page, we can see that we can toggle between climb 1 and 2, and we can go to takeoff data set. page. And in this page, we can basically control, first of all, the ATTCS, but whether it's on or off. You can see that immediately in the ICAS. We can toggle it. So as I said, in my company, it is mandatory to have the ATTCS on. And then it's this way for every takeoff and go around. Ref ECS. So the Ref ECS, basically, I did do a video of how to set all of the takeoff performance data in a separate video. You're welcome to check it out. But the Ref ECS basically answers the question: do the engines give bleed air during takeoff to the environmental control system, ECS? If yes, then Ref ECS is on. If we say no, the engines are out of the ECS for the takeoff because we need every ounce of thrust from them to produce thrust, every air pressure from them to produce thrust, we would say Ref ECS off, and then automatically, without us touching anything on the overhead, the system automatically closes the engine bleed air valves for takeoff, and then we can keep the APU on for that takeoff. So the APU bleed air would be fed into the ACS, give us a nice cool temperature, air conditioning, and even some pressurization once we make airborne. And then after takeoff, it reverts back to the engines as well. But basically, in an ideal takeoff when there's plenty of runway and we're not really marginal with performance, Ref ECS would be on, so we can shut off the APU, get rid of it, not use fuel anymore on it, and then just the engines are going to feed the ECS system, the environmental control system. If it is marginal, and again, it will be calculated in our takeoff calculations, then we would use Ref ECS off, and we keep the APU on for the takeoff. So that's Ref ECS. Moving on, we can talk about the Ref AI, Ref Anti-Ice. Ref Anti-Ice chooses between off, engine, and all. You can see that on the ICAS. In reality, I think we would need to hit enter before it actually translates into the actual FADEC. But you can see that it goes into the FADEC, and then we get an ICAS message on what the Ref Anti-Ice that is selected. I did a whole separate video on the Embraer anti-ice system specifically for the engine and the wing, so you're welcome to check it out and get some more details on that. But effectively, Ref AI says to the FADEC, again, we don't need to touch anything on the overhead; it's done automatically for us. But you're telling the system, hey, use the on engine, for example, you would get engine anti-ice during takeoff, and all is engine and wing anti-ice during takeoff. So that's Ref AI. Flakes takeoff, I will tell you about it in just a minute. Now let's go to TO1, TO2. I briefly mentioned it. You can see that it's an option. In this version, that's the field there, Prepare 3D. And therefore, we also have TO3. I don't have that in my company. Basically, you're telling the system, hey, treat it as another engine. So we have one engine that's TO1, and let's, again, to preserve the engine a little bit further and delay a little bit maintenance events, it's usually a company policy to use takeoff 2 as a default, and then you're basically, the entire baseline for the engine for today is going to be lower. So takeoff 2, climb 2, it's basically, you're telling it, treat it like a lower grade engine, use less thrust than usual, or limit the engine to a certain to its TO1 limit, and to a TO2 limit, and then you're using less thrust, and you can expand the maintenance events a little bit further. In my company, we are using takeoff 1, but then climb 2 is the default. We can switch between them. Basically, the transition from takeoff to climb thrust, whichever you chose, will occur as soon as you hit any vertical mode on the auto flight system. So from TOGA, when you switch to flight level change, for example, or VNAV, this is when the system switches from takeoff mode to climb mode. So from takeoff 1 to climb 2, for example. So that's the cutting line. And that's the importance of hitting that mode, not staying in TOGA, because as we said earlier, takeoff modes are time limited. How much time? We don't need to care about it because we just follow the profile and it's satisfactory. Below that, you can see the takeoff temperature. Takeoff temperature, the reason it's there, you're telling the FADEC what is the outside air temperature. And the reason it is because our temperature sensors are not reliable on the ground. The sun is heating them. There's no air flowing through them, so they're unreliable until there's decent airflow through them. So we have to tell the FADEC what is the current temperature outside. So right now it thinks the temperature is 13. When we press it and toggle this little knob over there, we can tell it no, it's actually 15. We use for that matter. We are using the ATIS, whatever the ATIS or the METAR or the actual report. That's what we were using to put the takeoff temperature. So that's the actual temperature outside. Next to it, you can see the flex takeoff. What is flex takeoff? This is another way of reducing the thrust even further from takeoff 1 or even takeoff 2, further down by saying, hey, the temperature is 15 outside, but I want you to treat the engine as if it is 40 degrees outside, Celsius, of course. Basically, what you're telling it is, if it was 40 degrees, what you would do? What would you do, FADEC? You would probably limit my engine thrust output so we don't exceed any limitation with the temperatures, the pressures, etc. So treat my engine today like it's 40 degrees outside or 42 degrees or 45 degrees and reduce that thrust limit to accommodate a higher temperature, basically. So what we would do, we would hit on, and then we go to that temperature and toggle it. And a very common temperature we use is 42, for example. So once we select that 42 and everything is set, we can hit that highlighted enter, and then you can see that everything is being fed into the FADEC. And once it's in the FADEC, it's also presented on our ICAS. So in reality, the mode we're using now is flex takeoff 1. We can see after that the ATTCS is armed. The flex temperature is 42 degrees, and the N1 limit for that takeoff is now 86.4%. And because of the lack of message on the ICAS itself, we can see that the ref anti-ice for this takeoff is going to be remaining off. And what's also nice about the system is, for example, if you have two engines on and the APU stays on for too long after that, the system can yell at you, hey, the reference performance you chose for takeoff is not being upheld because you told me you're not going to use APU for takeoff and you kept the APU on. So which is it? Do you want to turn off the APU, or do you need the APU for takeoff and therefore you want to take off the engine bleeds from the takeoff? So why didn't you set the ref ACS off, for example? So just a cool little feature that the system warns you if you selected one thing and are setting yourself up to another thing in the physical system structure. That's pretty much all I have. So this is how we set it. Like I said, it's not the flow. This is not the flow we would use to set up the performance. I did a separate video on it. You're welcome to check the performance video out, and you are welcome to also check out the anti-AS video. But this is basically focusing all about thrust rating select. Another example of thrust rating select exercise. So let's say we are taking off using the current version, the current settings we just put. So flex takeoff 1, flex 42, we're pushing TOGA, it's armed, and then on takeoff we are pushing the thrust levers a little bit, and the TOGA takes over and takes it all the way to the current limit, so the 86.4, and let's say right after V1, right at V1, we're getting an engine failure. So one engine would spool down, the ATTCS would engage, and therefore would, without the thrust lever actually moving, the thrust limit and as well as the current thrust would jump up from the current flex takeoff 142 degrees. It would jump up to takeoff 1 reserve. So we're going to use that takeoff 1 reserve all the way to acceleration altitude, 1,000 in our case. And at 1,000, we're going to initiate the acceleration to get the flaps up, and then we would go to con mode. We would go to TRS continuous. So that's maximum continuous, and we would use max continuous thrust for the remainder of this emergency event until we are practically landing. So that's one thing to an example of how do we actively choose between we'll go to the TRS page and choose another thrust rating. That's all I have. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. If you have any comments, I'm happy to hear. I do apologize for that lower quality today. I'm using Prepare 3D Field there add-on, and it's on another computer that's slightly lower quality. But I hope you can forgive me, and I hope you can enjoy this knowledge and implement it in the newer add-ons that we have available for Microsoft Flight Simulator and for X-Plane 12 as soon as they become advanced enough to incorporate them. Thank you very much. Let me know what you thought, and happy flying.